Greetings, everyone. My name is Tami Akambongo. Welcome to the Stage of the Arts with Tami Akambongo. Today, we are having our guest in this show. We cover issues around cultural and creative industry issues, where we invite guests to come and speak about certain issues in the industry. And we're hoping through this program, we're going to encourage, especially young people, to be more interested in terms of governance, policy, and understanding our industry better. Today, our guest, we are having Usis Monica Newton, National Arts Festival CEO. I'm sure many of you, especially the young ones, might be asking, who is Monica Newton, lo uphethe as CEO ye-National Arts Festival. Monica Newton was born in Bloemfontein and grew up in Clarence, where her family managed the Maluti Mountain Lodge for many years. The family still owns a home on a farm just outside the town. Her love of the arts was fostered by her mother, Margaret, who raised Monica and sister Usara as a single parent for most of their lives. Margaret loved reading, film, theater, dance, and music, and shared this passion actively with her daughters. Monica Newton, educated in Free State. Monica matriculated from Bethlehem for Trekker High School and completed her studies at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree with Sociology and Psychology majors, a Bachelor of Arts honors in Industrial Sociology, and a Master's in Sociology from the University of the Witwatersrand. Her research in support of her MA degree focused on the economics of the film distribution industry. Monica Newton has worked with national, provincial, and local government and related government agencies since 1997. As a full-time employee and as a consultant in her own business, she has been part of creative industry strategic development and research processes across the country, and worked in the field of cultural development and the creative industry for most of her career. Prior to being appointed as the CEO of the National Arts Festival and the Grahamstown Foundation, Monica Newton was the head of the Gauteng Department of Sports, Arts, Culture and Recreation from August 2017 to November 2019. Over her career, Newton has served numerous premiers and ministers as an executive manager in the public service, including her role as the Deputy Director General, Arts and Culture and Promotion and Development at the Department of Arts and Culture from April 2013 to July 2017. From January 2012 to July 2013, she was the CEO of the National Arts Council, a statutory board reporting to the Department of Arts and Culture and established to support and develop the arts in South Africa. She was also the Chief Director, Socio-Economic Research and Chief Director, Strategic and Operational Support in the Gauteng office of the Premier from 2008 to 2011. When Monica Newton was appointed as the CEO of one of the biggest festivals in the country, National Arts Festival, this is what some of the well-respected practitioners said. Congratulations to Monica Newton on her appointment as the CEO of the National Arts Festival. Monica is a phenomenal administration, brilliant strategies, highly network organizer, and a smart visionary with a deep passion, knowledge, and understanding of the arts, cultural, and creative sector. She is one of South Africa's remarkable person in terms of governance. The festival is in great hands. That was a quote from Ismail Mahomet. And Uputsandile Memela Utiena, she is principal, passionate, and committed workaholic. We wish her all the best. Congrats. The last one from Marcus Tebuho Disando. Congratulations to Monica. NAF is very lucky to have such a dedicated servant of the arts. Today, in the State of the Arts with Utami Akambongo, we've got Usis Monica as our guest. We want to talk to her and find out about, you understand, her role in terms of the arts and what she has been up to. Good day, Sis Monica. How are you doing?
Good day. Hello, Tommy. Hello, all of your viewers. It's lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Goodness, people said such nice things. I'm blushing.
Yeah, that's why I felt maybe we needed to read them just in case you did not get it because you were busy. How is Makanda?
Makande is really interesting. It's a small town. It has its water issues. So today is a water on day. It's a good day. We turn on the taps and there's a response. Tomorrow is a water off day. But it is extraordinary how the town adapts and copes. And of course, it has a very long history with the festival. We sit in a building called the 1820 Settlers Monument, which speaks to its fractured past and history. So yeah, I moved here in 2020 and I'm still learning about the place, but I'm enjoying it. I'm a small town girl at heart. As you mentioned, I grew up in Clarence and I've kind of come back home in a way to a small place.
Once again, thank you very much for agreeing to come to this platform. And I think one of the reasons why I felt so strong to have you, because you have been leading in some of the most very influential positions. And as I mentioned earlier when we were talking, there's so many young people that wants to get a better understanding of this position. And I think you're one of the most respected arts administrator. And I want to start there. Can you share with us the importance of arts administration? As you know, young people are too obsessed about being in front of the stage, being on stage, and very few who understand the importance of arts administration. Can you share with us?
Well, thank you. And I think it is important to note that I do not have a creative bone in my body. Not at all. I cannot sing, I cannot hold a note, I cannot dance, but I am fascinated by creative process. And I've been an audience of it my whole life. As you mentioned in your opening remarks, my late mother was incredibly important in building my sister and I into very, very, very passionate audiences for the arts. But one of the most important things is that creative process can happen on its own, but it happens better when it's supported and managed and helped. And there is an enormous cohort of people who help to make the value chain work. Obviously, at the center is the creator. There's no question. Without that incredible idea, amazing song, beautiful piece of theater, nothing happens. But in order to make that piece of theater happen, it is so fundamental that there is a system of people like myself who are pushing paper from one side of the building to the next, which was largely my civil service career, or alternatively, essentially running festivals and those kinds of things. So I'm exceptionally proud of the arts administrators that are emerging in the country. It's not an easy job. And somehow one is seen, if one is a failed artist somehow, then clearly one's job is to be an administrator. And I don't think that's fair, because I think arts administrators are as creative, as passionate about the arts as artists themselves, but we have a different role to play. And ours is very much in support of and managing and helping and assisting where we can. And I'm in a position now, a very odd position, in that I've been here at the National Arts Festival. I've run 2 festivals, but none of them have been live. So I'm possibly the least successful festival director in the history of the National Arts Festival at the moment. Fingers crossed for 2022.
And then very good thing. When I was reading your CV and making research, I was like, wow. You understand that it makes sense. In most of your position, you deal a lot with policies and governance. And we've been complaining in the past to say, Uguti, in South Africa, there are very few people who are really good when it comes to policies and governance. But I know we've got some couple of graduates and new people who are coming into this field. But in terms of the positions that you were holding, how much it is for artists nowadays to understand policies and governance.
Look, I think that the most important thing is to be interested, is to take the time, as you have obviously done, Tami, to really get to grips with the policy environment, and not just arts policy, but fundamental policy like the Constitution. Because the Constitution is what sets up the framework of how, for example, local government, provincial government, and national government work together, sets up the roles and responsibilities of cabinet, members of the executive committee, or provincial MECs. It highlights a whole range of requirements for how government is meant to function. Because our value chains are so complex, we might have arts policy, but we are as dependent on other kinds of policies as many networked or interconnected industries are. Tourism, hospitality, city-based policies about urban space development, all of those kinds of things. Education policy affects us dramatically because it speaks to how children are introduced to the arts. So I think being open is the first thing. And the second thing is really starting to learn about the difference between policy and strategy and projects and programs. And that comes with the experience of learning and knowing and researching and understanding. And it is wonderful that there are graduates that are starting to emerge from the space with a particular focus on cultural policy. But certainly my own education in sociology was very much about systems and how people work in systems. And if you had to distinguish psychology from sociology, psychology looks at how individuals work, sociology looks at how groups of people work in whatever circumstance. And my interest was always in the industrial space, trade unions, government, politics, those kinds of things. So I was very lucky to be in a position to use my education on a daily basis in jobs that I had in government. It was incredibly empowering.
Another thing that I wanted to ask, as you know, we've got so many, when people are discussing issues about cultural and creative industry, they will say artists needs to be in front and artists needs to lead these structures and blah, blah, blah. But I want to come, how important is the role of education? Because when I'm looking at your bio, you understand that you've done some study, and some people might not understand Ukuti why artists maybe who were only trained in performance are not becoming CEOs or artistic directors of this place. For you, how important it is to study further, whether you studied at university or these short courses, you know, how important it is to study other things.
Well, I suppose it's a question of priorities, but fundamentally, our entire constitutional principle is based on how important education is, whether it's informal or formal, to move our society and individuals forward. And certainly in my own life, if I had not had the privilege of going to university, and it is a privilege, there is no question, I would not have been able to fulfill the roles that I did or even have access to those kinds of employment opportunities. So I suppose I would throw the question back a little bit differently, is to say, okay, what is your intention in your career? Because there are a lot of careers where actually experiential training, networks, sheer talent are more important than pieces of paper. But if you are planning on any sort of administrative role, and if you do see yourself in the role of CEO or artistic director of a major state theater or something like that, then education is going to be a really powerful enabler of that. Now, in the government system, you've also got very, very large prescriptive requirements. So you actually have job evaluations driving the qualification and job profiles for heads of departments, CEOs of state entities, chief directors, directors. So there's a system that is determining the sort of minimum entry levels. And for a lot of artists, they may feel excluded from that process. But one of the wonderful things about the education system in this country is the possibility of the recognition of prior learning. And of course, programs that actually allow artists on the basis of their experience to come into postgraduate diploma programs or those kinds of initiatives that allow you to then use your experience as a gateway to an educational qualification. So I guess it's a question of where you imagine yourself being. And if the opportunity is there for education, I would say take it. There's no downside to education. Even if you don't necessarily use the degree, it will teach you things. The diploma will teach you things. The act of training and engaging and being in class or learning new things will inspire you in different ways. So I'm seriously pro-education. I'm sure you can tell.
Thank you very much, Monica. Now, let's come to talk because what is good about you, you've worked for government, whether locally, provincially, and nationally, and also working with some of the entities. And in this country, sometimes artists or cultural and creative industry don't really understand what is happening within government when you are working in government. And then it tends to create a conflict of not really understanding. So when we speak to you, I wanted to unpack some of the previous positions that you held and also looking at your strategy and your vision in each and every job, hoping it will inspire other people out there who wants to go to those jobs. Let's start with your position as the head of the Gauteng Department of Sports, Arts, Culture and Recreation. When you went into that position, what was coming in your mind, your approach, your vision, and how did you feel about the role that you played? Thanks.
Well, that becoming an HOD was the most senior level of government I'd ever been at. So for me, it was a major sort of step forward, not so much in terms of salary level or anything like that, but in terms of responsibilities. And the incredible thing that I learned about being an HOD was how hard those jobs actually are. And I was very interested to take up that position in Gauteng because, of course, I'd worked in the province before and have lived there for many, many years. But it was also an opportunity for me to see and learn and understand how culture and sport and recreation were being implemented at provincial level. And provincial departments implement things very, very differently to national government departments because they are closer to the service delivery interface. So, for example, I would go to sports events where officials from the department would have organized the entire event. They wouldn't necessarily have given a grant to a sports organization to organize that event. So it was a completely different understanding of the role of that government worker compared to the colleagues that I had, for example, at the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. So it was a very, very interesting experience for me. And of course, one of the hardest things that you recognize as you become more and more senior, especially in the public service, is how much more your governance responsibilities are. What your job is to manage budgets and risk and PFMA compliance and all of those kinds of elements. So you're actually quite far removed in some ways from the actual programs and projects that are happening in your field of vision, which is actually very unfortunate because you're spending your time in audit and risk committee meetings, in cabinet meetings, in pre-cabinet sessions where you're also contributing to the broader strategy and program of the province or whichever structure you need to work in. So I went into that position knowing that I needed to learn a lot. And very critically, I needed to learn a lot about how the political interface works with the administrative interface, because of course, as you become more and more senior in government, so your interface with political systems, structures, and very, very high level and powerful decision-making systems starts to become closer and closer. So I needed to learn a lot about how those systems work and how decisions are made and how to manage both the political aspects of my job as well as the administrative aspects of my job. And it was overwhelming. It was a lot. I was very, very lucky to be a junior HOD in a group of very senior provincial HODs in Gauteng. So everybody was very kind and very supportive of me, but it was a very, very tough job, very, very tough job. And it taught me a lot about how important a very, very nuanced understanding of politics is at that very high level of job.
I'm going to come back to some of the things that you say, but I want us to go. And then you moved as the head of the Gauteng department, and then you also held the position of the Deputy Director General, Arts and Culture. And last week, funny enough, I was having an interview with Ismail Mohammed, and he kept on saying, Uguti, the problem, we might as all want to say the minister must go, but he mentioned something which I found it very interesting, that some of the most powerful positions in the department, including the position of Director General and blah, 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 of the Deputy Director General, moving away from just the head of the department provincially. How was that transition? And what did you learn? What was your strategy when you moved into that position?
So I had been at Arts and Culture a couple of times. So I had started out my career in 1997, and then had come back in 2013 as the DDG. And it was, again, a very senior position. And one of the most important things about the public service is that it is a chain. It is really, really important to understand how that chain works. And I came into the system at a time when the Mzansi Golden Economy program was just starting, and it was struggling to find its feet because it wasn't really structured and organized into a structured, systemic, bureaucratic system. And I am a bureaucrat. So one of my key jobs was really to begin to institutionalize the Mzansi Golden Economy program, to create a structure and a framework for its implementation that obviously supported its strategic intention. So setting up the panels for open calls, putting in place all of those systems, doing the feasibility studies for Art Bank, starting the tender process and eventually awarding the tender for the South African Cultural Observatory, and starting to do a lot of that basic initial work. But of course, also as a DDG, and Ishmael is not wrong, they are very, very influential positions. And of course, they have decision-making authority on their own. And that, again, is one of the really interesting things about these positions, is that as you become more and more senior, so you also take on board enormous personal liabilities, both criminal and civil, in terms of the PFMA for the decisions that you make. So when you are able to sign off on a R2.5 million project, you take responsibility for that project. That's how the civil service works. So a lot of what I was doing in that particular role was really working in MGE, but also, of course, learning, because that particular portfolio also includes institutions like the National Arts Council, the performing arts institutions, but also the incredible National Language Service, which is one of the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture's hidden gems, where it does translation and editing and terminology development in all South Africa's indigenous languages. It's quite the most extraordinary unit, and I learned a lot because language is not my field. So I've always been very lucky in my jobs to be stretched and challenged, but also be given an opportunity to learn about new areas of work and to make a little contribution to all of those. And of course, one of the things that you also are in the senior public service is part of the accounting system to Parliament. So you're also spending a very, very large amount of time explaining what you're doing, accounting for what you're doing, generally being flame grilled either on the left or the right side for what you are or aren't doing, depending on which side of the mood of any portfolio or select committee is. So again, the job was an incredible learning experience. I also had the opportunity when I was at the department to actually act in two portfolios, one dealing with institutional governance and international relations, and the other dealing with arts, culture, promotion, and development. And that was a trial by fire, but I did enjoy both assignments very much, and I learned a lot. But one of the incredible things about these jobs is just the responsibilities that you have as an individual. So you're very concerned about what you sign, how you sign it, is it correct? And so a lot of the frustrations of the delays I think that people experience is also understanding how the very, very large and complex government decision-making systems work and that kind of thing, and why institutions like the National Arts Council actually have far quicker decision-making systems than, for example, government departments. And the minute government departments, which are big machines that are used to dealing with homogeneous transactions, when something different arrives, the system has to sort of really think very hard about how to deal with this, consult, make sure, is this really something that we can do? And part of what was so exciting was also about interpreting the rules of government into our incredibly vibrant, creative, complicated sector. And let me be frank, I don't think we always succeeded.
And another thing that I wanted to ask you, since you've worked for provincially and national government, there are a lot of people who are saying it's a bad mistake to combine sport, arts, and culture. How was it for you, and what is your personal take as someone that has been working from the government side? Do you think it's a right decision, or we just complaining as arts and culture, we don't understand what is happening inside? But for you, who has been working there, do you think it's an issue, or it's something that is not even an issue?
You know, I think it's an opportunity in the same way as when arts and culture was with science and technology way back when I first started at the department. Because one of the really, really interesting things about sports and arts and culture is that, sure, in the sponsorship space, and sometimes it feels like we're competing with sports for attention, and that is a very real issue. But what's fascinating is in the recreation space, sport and arts and culture are on the same level. They are embraced by children and communities, and we're the ones that make the boxes, whereas people who are recreationally enjoying sport or arts and culture are not making that distinction. So and this is really where your audience is going to flame grill me. I think it's actually an opportunity for us to exploit, because I think that sport can learn from arts and culture can learn from sport, and the bridge is recreation. Because if we both sports and arts and culture start building communities that are invested in amateur sports, amateur arts and culture, that go back to, the heydays of, for example, where township theater and township music and township sports and arts and culture was happening despite government. This is what people were doing for themselves to enrich their own communities. And then the role of government is about providing spaces, is about providing access to the opportunity to be part of recreation programs. It's not necessarily about who gets funded for what. It's that the facilities exist. And the sports industry has as many issues with, for example, community soccer fields, netball pitches, tennis courts, swimming pools, as we have with community arts centers. So again, it seems like we would be natural allies in arguments for respecting professionals, protecting athletes and artists. So yeah, I see opportunity, not necessarily competition, but it is also about how in that government department things are prioritized. So if there is a sense that we're only focusing on one at the expense of the other, then that's a bad thing. And that's bad in environmental affairs, it's bad in tourism, it's bad in any government department. If there's a sense that the portfolio is not balanced and that there's not an equal amount of attention being paid to the combined portfolios that are in that particular department or ministry.
Wow, this is really good, and we are learning. Before we move into speaking about the National Arts Festival, before we close this one, I want to understand, because obviously the minister, as you were talking about politically and administration, the minister is sort of like a politically deployee. But how is that a relationship working? Because, like, for example, if you are working and you are meant to do administration stuff, and then on the other side, there's a political mandate that needs to be done. We understand that. How I just want to get a sense of that working relationship, because I feel maybe we as cultural and creative industry practitioners are not understanding that dynamics, because we always say it's politically. It was agreed at maybe Luthuli House or blah, 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 and then it's meant to be implemented by the administrators. So can you share with us the advantage and disadvantage, if there are any disadvantage in that relationship of politically and administration-wise?
I think from my perspective, the most important kind of priorities and strategies come from the political domain, because that's the electoral mandate. And that is what gives expression to the notion of democratic rights in South Africa, is that there was an electoral mandate, and that mandate was basically endorsed by the voting populace. So to understand how that sort of policy environment becomes turned into political priorities and how those priorities are translated into administrative plans and strategies and programs is exactly where the importance of that interface is between the political and the administration, is that the political must direct the administration. It's not helpful to the system if the bureaucrats are doing one thing and the politicians are doing another. That's not in keeping with the constitutional mandate of what those two structures are supposed to be doing. So very, very good bureaucrats are very skilled at translating political mandates into administrative actions and functions, and interpreting political policies and priorities into a structured, clear, and focused agenda for a machine as big as government to start moving towards. So that's really where things that are important need to be decided. I think that some of our problems is that we get distracted by the noise on the side. It can become about my project or my plan or this person's history or a past with a particular person, rather than perhaps a collective focus. And that really has what's been so amazing and so difficult, I think, in some respects about the last couple of years. We've really seen the arts community starting to come together in different kinds of ways and different kinds of structures. But you are starting to see agendas emerging in the arts sector in a coherent and structured way, which is a very good thing for starting to ensure that both the political domain and the administrative domain understand what the priorities of the electorate are on the ground. And I think that those conversations also need to be constructive and understanding of both the scale and scope and responsibilities of everybody. I think when we're standing and criticizing rightfully, but not offering constructive advice or a sense of how it could be done differently, then we are also part of the problem. So I'm very encouraged and excited by these new structures that are starting to actually propose solutions to problems that we've had for years. And I think that's a very, very powerful thing.
And then you also spend some time as the CEO of the National Arts Council. How was that experience of working at the NAC?
The NAC was very interesting because I joined the organization at a time where there were some very, very difficult financial governance issues. And my core role as the CEO was to sort those out. There had been an adverse audit opinion, which, and this is really where I'm sorry, listeners, if your eyes glaze over, my sincerest apologies. But obviously, on the good side of an audit opinion, you've got a clean opinion where the AG says, look, everything's fine. There might be one or two things. Unqualified, everything's fine, but we're worried about these material issues, which we've picked up in our audit. And then the two bad findings are disclaimer, which is where the AG finds that there's actually not enough information for them to actually give an opinion. And they're like, you know what? Nostradamus wouldn't do this. We're stepping back. We're not making a decision. In an adverse audit opinion, it means that there is a direct disagreement between the auditee and the auditor about what is being presented in the financials. And so a big part of my job was to try and sort that out. And so slowly but surely, we managed to put the systems and the structures in place to fix that problem. And it's largely now not something that the National Arts Council is seriously affected by. But in my tenure at the National Arts Council, I was also privileged enough to work with the SA Fringe season, which was one of the really, really big international programs, one of the first that the NAC had implemented on any large scale. And that was incredibly exciting to be working at that level, to be working on a project of that scale, and to light up the Eiffel Tower, which is still one of the most difficult contracts in English and French I've ever had to manage in my whole life. And it was an incredible privilege. And of course, also very important to see in the NAC structures how important the panels are for making recommendations that are based on merit, how difficult it is to take a really tiny amount of money and responsibly allocate grants, how to manage a grant system in such a way that you don't have massive surpluses. Because while the NAC Act allows for the generation of reserves, from the perspective of the PFMA, a surplus is a bad thing because government should actually spend all of its allocated money in a single year. And the difficulty with running both a grant process and an implementation process in a single year is that chances are you actually don't spend the last tranche in that year. So you're now carrying a surplus, and that's a budgeting challenge, it's a governance challenge, it's a reporting challenge. So it was very, very interesting for me to sort of see the grant making on the inside. And I have enormous respect, of course, for everybody at the NAC who are doing this on a daily basis and have been doing it since 1997, when the organization opened its doors with 10 million rand. And it now has a budget, I think this coming year, of 124 million, which relatively is still not a huge amount of money, but it's an important resource.
And then, Sis Monica, there was something strange that happened from one CEO to the other CEO. I remember when there was a PESP Day, the National Arts Festival you took your old bosses, if I may say, the National Arts Council to court over the PESP issue. And I remember I attended one of the portfolio meeting whereby the DG was saying it's really unfortunate that a structure like a National Arts Festival, which is sometimes funded by the DAC, does not understand that DAC does not have money. They were expecting for someone, you understand, for the National Arts Festival to be in a better position to understand. But on the other side, the industry, if not all, were really proud that a structure like National Arts Festival is taking a stand. We understand, especially with the original signed contract. And for you as the CEO, what was the approach and what was your thinking? I don't know whether it's still in court. So if there are any issues that you are not allowed to speak, please feel free, don't speak about, but I would love to hear your comment and approach.
Sure. So, I mean, it is an incredibly difficult and unprecedented situation. And we, as the NAF, have actually had a meeting with the DG to clear the air a little bit, because, of course, DG was not in office during a lot of what proceeded with the National Arts Council because he was so terribly ill. So he came back in April, and at that point already the court proceedings had started. So we had a very productive meeting with him and his colleagues at the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, and we cleared the air a little bit, I think. And because we are partners of long standing, and because we have a joint interest in actually creating and supporting a functional arts sector, not one that's running to court backwards and forwards, but it is important to note that this is the first time in the 48-year history of the National Arts Festival that it has actually been forced to take a funder to court. So that just gives you a sense of how unusual the circumstances around the PSP were. And the National Arts Festival's difficulties, and this is mirrored by many other applicants, Tami, so certainly it's not only our experience, but the difficulty is that the NAF received its contract on the 28th of January, and with an implementation deadline of the end of March, had to start working very, very quickly, because we had literally 6 weeks to implement those projects. So for our purposes, by the time it came to the end of February and March, we were now issuing revised letters. We had already committed the funds. We were contracted, we had production started. I mean, we had an enormous number, over 60 productions ongoing around the country at that point. And so for our purposes, at that point, it was just not possible to accept a 56% cut in the budget. And the reality is that we met with the NAC, we explained some more, and then we explained again, and we saw no movement. We put a settlement offer on the table to begin a conversation to go, okay, guys, we've got commitments, you've got a budget problem. let's have a discussion, but that was completely ignored. So we had no option but to approach the courts. And slowly but surely, we're going through what I'm learning is a very long, complicated, and expensive process. So basically, at the moment, there is a judgment from the High Court issued on the 21st of June in our favor. The NAC applied for leave to appeal in the High Court, but that was refused, and then indicated their intention to apply to the Supreme Court of Appeal for leave to appeal. So that's where we are at the moment. As the NAF, because we still have live contracts and incomplete projects and work that needs to be done, last week, Wednesday, we attempted and lost at getting an interim enforcement order. So allowing for the circumstances that we were in to be considered by the courts, for the court to then instruct the NAC to pay regardless of the appeal. But we lost that with costs, unfortunately. So now all attention is on opposing the leave to appeal. And the system will essentially allow for consideration of the leave to appeal, and it'll either be denied or approved, and then an appeal process will start. But yeah, here we are, still fighting. And of course, behind us, a large number of lawsuits and claims, etc. as well. So it is an exceptionally unfortunate circumstance. And one really does hope that there might be intervention to move us beyond this. But I think one of the other things that we also need to be a little bit better about is conflict management in our sector. Conflict is a natural part of our lives and our world. And if it becomes very personal and it takes a position that doesn't deal with the issue. I mean, there's that phrase in sport, play the ball, not the man or the woman. And I think that's one of the things that we really do need to learn to do, is to fight constructively, is to accept the fact that we're not always going to agree, that we are going to have battles, but that we don't allow those to completely destroy relationships. And I'm hoping that we've not done that. I'm hoping that we can all, because of the age and importance of the National Arts Festival, and of course the role that the NAC plays, and of course the DSAC, I'm hoping that we can learn from this experience and move beyond it. But it has been incredibly difficult. I'm sure you know, I mean, you guys spent 60 days sleeping in a boardroom. Nobody knows more about how difficult it was than you guys. And of course, the ripple effect is still there. You have folks who still cannot pay for services rendered, and that's going to damage things. It's going to damage the fabric of our sector. It damages trust. It damages all sorts of things. And so for myself, I wonder if what we gained versus what we lost was worth it. But again, I'm not on the NAC Council.
Thank you very much, Ms. Monica. And then tell us in terms of your, because you came in at the National Arts Festival at the bad year, if I can call it that, with the COVID, because you know every artist, every cultural creative industry is looking forward to go to the festival, and then COVID happened last year and this year. In terms of how did it affect your new strategy and approach as sort of like as a new CEO, and what are your plans in terms of 2022 and beyond?
Well, I mean, 2020, basically, we set fire to the old plan and started with the new plan because the old plan was not going to work. And of course, we delivered the National Arts Festival basically in lockdowns levels 5 and 4. So we were completely apart from each other as a team. At the time, we were working under a license issued in terms of broadcast, because we were essentially creating content for online. So that's what permitted us to continue to create the festival. I think it was a watershed for both the arts and the National Arts Festival. It taught us a completely different way of working, where because we had so little time, it wasn't possible for us to just call for proposals, adjudicate proposals, and say to Tami, well, you know what, your proposal was approved or your proposal wasn't. We were actually required, and this is a good thing, to actually sit down with artists and talk about what was possible, think about what was possible. So our creative and technical teams really did change how we worked completely to make sure that we could deliver that festival online. And I think that's a useful lesson, because at the end of the day, the role of the National Arts Festival should actually be as an enabler, not as a gatekeeper. And it really does speak about the importance of how the festival presents itself, both to the artistic community and, of course, to its audiences, which is to present professional, high quality work, regardless of the circumstance. And look, 2020 was complicated. We learned a lot of really powerful lessons that hopefully saved us in 2021. But 2021 was also incredibly difficult, because we had planned for a little bit of live, and then even that was cut down. So we then had to, once again, at very short notice, pivot. But we learned how to live stream. There's now a group of theater professionals, technical professionals, who understand how to live stream and how to produce content of that nature. We also had very interesting discussions with the artistic community, some of whom said to us, you know what, online's not for us. We're not doing this. And I think that's a very empowering thing as well, is for the artistic community to actually be able to step back and say, actually, our work cannot be successfully produced online. So we would rather hold over until there's an opportunity to do live work. But I'm exceptionally proud of what the National Arts Festival team, and it is a world-class team, what was managed under such very, very difficult circumstances. But we were also incredibly fortunate to have our government partners behind us, Eastern Cape Provincial Government, the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, Standard Bank, all of our normal partners. None of them stepped back and said, you know what, we can't do this. They were like, what can we do? And how can we support the festival to support the artistic and technical community? And so, of course, that just makes things a little bit easier. But I'm really nervous about 2022. It's going to be my first live festival 3 years into this job. It's unheard of. But I think one of the things that we are going to have to really, really understand and recognize is that live events have changed and will change. We don't know who our audience is going to be. We're not sure what the virus is going to be doing to our community. So we've been watching very closely what's been happening abroad. Do we, for example, require vaccine passports to be part of audiences? Is that responsible? Is that right? Is that constitutional? So these are all of the kinds of discussions that we're starting to have as we begin to think about what 2022 will bring. And of course, 2023 is the 50-year anniversary of the National Arts Festival. So yeah, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to question about. Are artists on the Fringe, for example, going to have the resources to bring work to Makhanda as they've done in the past, when they've not been working for 18 months, when project funding has been very, very limited, if available at all? They've lost homes, lives, cars, instruments, friends, family. Yeah, I think that we're in for a difficult 3 to 4 years as we begin to live with COVID, not necessarily imagine a post-COVID environment. And it sounds depressing, But in other respects, it's also really interesting and exciting. And the arts community is in a space at the moment where it's open to change. It's asking questions. It's challenging the status quo. And that's a good thing. That's a really, really good thing.
Another thing that I wanted us to talk about, because it's something that has come up over the years. Obviously, there's a big difference between Fringe, Arena, and the main program. In the past, some people have raised concern, especially with the main festival, that is not fully representing like the 9 provinces of South Africa. In Fringe, it's a totally different, because you get artists from Limpopo and blah, blah, blah. Are there any plans, or are you looking at the artistic work that you receive, that when you go to Grahamstown, especially in the May festival, whereby you see sort of like the diversity of South Africa? When you go, you watch a beautiful piece from Mpumalanga that speaks about Mpumalanga culture. When you go Kapstadt, you understand? Is there any plan to make sure that the main program include quite a variety in terms of a national footprint?
Well, the festival does have a national footprint, and it is interesting. It does change with each year, though, because you're very right. We receive applications, and so it's really, really important for us to really reach out as widely as we can with that information. So we absolutely do get representation and interest from all kinds of, not just provincial representation, but actually good representation across the arts disciplines as well: dance, comedy, music, theater, and also languages. So there are a lot of different ways that the curatorial team has to approach the question of the curated program. So certainly this year we had amazing representation from the Eastern Cape, from Gauteng, from KZN, and of course from the Western Cape. We had some representation from Free State, from the Northwest, and the Northern Cape. But unfortunately, when we look at the balance of the Fringe and the curated program, we had nobody from Limpopo joined us this year. And that's really sad, because there's no question that there's an incredibly rich artistic community there. So the question that we need to now ask ourselves is to go, okay, what happened? Was it the fact that it's online? And that's really where the dynamic kicked in? Or was it a conversation that we didn't have with the Limpopo arts community that we should have? So there's a lot of thought that we are kind of giving to how best to create an exciting, interesting, balanced, diverse program. And anybody with suggestions and ideas, we are open, because it is a complex thing. And certainly our Eastern Cape provincial partners have always said to us, look, okay, you live here. You have to work with your family, and they are not wrong. So we're very proud of, for example, the work that was presented by Eastern Cape artists, both on the Fringe, the Eastern Cape Showcase, and the Main this year, because it is an extraordinary achievement for any artist to be producing new work under these circumstances. And really, really hats off to the artistic community for being so creative and so innovative in spite of what's happening around us. It's been incredibly inspiring to see the work that was presented this year.
Yeah, as you've heard, if you've got any ideas, try to engage with the CEO. And there was a nice program that was happening at the National Arts Festival. It was called the Remix Program, because I remember I was part of it, whereby they identify like upcoming artists, arts administrators, producers, and they spend some time at the festival and engage with also international guests and attend our workshops. And then later on, we were taken to go to UK as part of that program, which I thought it's really amazing. And in the beginning, we were talking about arts administrators. we understand that in the young people who are not into that field, or maybe it's one of the program that we must engage. But before we close, I want to talk about, because from your experience, you've got the experience of working in government and also in the cultural and creative industry. In your take, Sis Monica, what do you think needs to be done in order for the three spheres of government to work in a good way with the cultural and creative industry? You know, every year when I'm going to Grahamstown, regardless of the challenges some of the provinces get with their provincial department, but it's a very good initiative, you know, because, you know, by the time of Grahamstown, there's a portion of money that will be coming from provincial government to assist artists to go there. You understand, to Grahamstown, although there are challenges, but it's a good thing. What do you think needs to be done, you understand, to nurture that relationship of the three spheres, not only national? Because some of the issues that are happening for artists are local issues. They don't need national government. Some of them are provincial. So in your take, as someone that worked within the government, what do you think needs to be done to fix that relationship?
Well, the first thing is that we need good, strong policy that actually talks to all three spheres and that really understands the responsibilities of all spheres. In the past, our policies have really only spoken to national, touched on province a little bit. Please create a provincial arts council, maybe, if you can afford it. You know, so in essence, really creating a very, very strong policy frame. And then, of course, it's also important for the planning structures to be robust. And I must admit, I'm very excited by, for example, the district development model that the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs is spearheading at the moment, because instead of planning now being handed down from national to local, it's actually going to work the other way and start moving from district level up. So the minute we start embracing those kinds of cultural planning initiatives, and the responsibility on us as cultural practitioners is to be involved, to be there, to be part of those plans and those processes. The other thing I think that we need to do is really, really learn how to speak to one another better and engage better and understand each other's issues better. Because when we're on either side of the road yelling at each other, you just get tired and you get a headache. And the traffic that's coming past you doesn't care. So we really need to find new ways of finding each other. And maybe that does mean compromise on both sides. And that's something that we need to be really, really prepared for. I think that we do need to think about our institutional infrastructure and where we spend what we spend. Because the reality is that policy is an instrument to guide government spending. And that's why policy is so important. But we also need to recognize that we're spending an enormous amount of money on stuff and not necessarily people and not necessarily processes. But the other fundamental thing is we need to improve the funding mix. Because at the moment, we're all competing for little bits of grant funding. Even in the PSP frame, it was kind of, while it was individual and organizations, okay, you still had tiny organizations competing against huge organizations. And that's also something that we need to adjust, and we need to create different kinds of financing instruments. Grant funding, yes. Seed funding, expansion capital, venture capital, preferential loan finance, overdraft facilities. Those are the kinds of things that we need to run ourselves professionally. And arts and culture is not necessarily the right place for us to have those conversations. The film industry has actually been leading the way in having those discussions with trade and industry and IDC and all of those big institutions, and we can learn from them. And they're our family. So we can also begin to use those lessons and approach things a little bit differently in some respects. And I think that fundamentally also we've got into the habit of projects. And every time there's a project, there needs to be an organization behind the project. So then the project now creates a concurrent obligation because the organization has to survive, so it has to continue to apply for project funding. And I think that is counterproductive, because eventually we're going to have so many organizations. And how are we going to support everybody? So we need to be collaborating more, working together more. Funding environments need to also adjust themselves to the fact that not every project necessarily needs an institutional infrastructure behind it. Sometimes it's perfectly fine just to implement a project. Doesn't need a massive governance structure and a board and minutes and, all of that kind of stuff. It can just be a collaborative project created by an artist collective. And we need to be responsive to that kind of thing as well, because otherwise we're also just reinforcing the problems that we've created all along since 1997.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come on board. As I said in the beginning, this program, we just invite different cultural and creative industry people to talk about the work, because I really feel these are the conversations that we are not having in public. These are the conversations that can help others to better understand what is happening out there. As you said, we just need to find a language of speaking to one another. So when people understand things, you understand that they act totally different. And sometimes it's just the information that is needed. From your side, any closing remarks before we let you go back to Makanda without water?
It's water today, so it's a good day. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed chatting to you. It was great to sort of think back and think about the lessons learned. And congratulations on this initiative. And I wish you, and of course your viewers, your listeners, and everybody all the best. It's going to be a difficult year. 2021, 2022 is going to be perhaps even more complicated. So let's work together. Let's talk more. Let's take care of each other as best as we can, and let's just get through this, because it's going to be another complicated and difficult time.
Thank you very much, Sis Monica, and good luck to your work at the NA National Arts Festival. To everyone that has watched, thank you very much for tuning in. Let's join again on Wednesday. I'm going to be talking to Lesego van Niekerk, whereby we look at the role of dance and why our dancers are so quiet, why there are few dancers who are speaking about the issues that are around the dance. So to everyone, thank you very much for tuning in. God bless. We're out.